Not only was this difficult due to how fantastic all of these albums are, listening to them back to back for extended periods of time is probably bad for your mental health. Today we are ranking the albums of ULCERATE, and we're starting with Of Fracture and Failure in 2007. Coming off of two pretty strong EPs, this was the first full-length record from the New Zealand technical death metal band, and while it's a little rough around the edges, already it's showcasing the band's especially chaotic approach to drums and guitar. In fact, at times, with the vocals here courtesy of Ben Reed, it almost feels more in line with mathcore albums of the decade. Performances and instrumentation are a cut above the rest, somehow turning dissonance into a hypnotic drone with tracks like The Mask of Satyr, and I love the eerie chill of Failure. In many ways, I'd say this early era is much more akin to bands like Cryptopsy before they evolved into their own signature sound from there. Jamie has also commented that parts of this album feel convoluted for the sake of it, so for that reason, it's just going to good. But again, all of these albums are worth checking out. They followed that up with Everything is Fire in 2009. This is very much the album that really put the band on the map, and now with bassist Paul Kellen taking over on vocals that the entire band wanted to take in a darker direction. The title is in reference to Greek philosopher Heraclitus' metaphor of the constant state of change everything goes through. If the previous material feels inspired by Cryptopsy, this feels much more aligned with Immolation and to an extent Gorguts. Right from Drowning Within, we are thrown headfirst into a spiraling vortex of technical fury. Likewise, We Are Nil feels like being chewed up in the gears of giant smoke-spewing machinery. One could draw some comparisons to Portal, but this feels so much more pissed off and aggressive than that. Kekas is also a standout with some pretty memorable serpent-like guitars seeming to slither their way through the chaos, as well as a minimalist dark foreboding interlude that only further emphasizes the violence by contrast. Love those punctuated blasts of drums on the earth at its knees, and the strangely infectious grooves of soullessness embraced, and the final apocalyptic chaos of the closing title track. Still one of the best, if you ask me. It is going to perfection. Next up is Destroyers of All in 2011. The title here continues with nihilistic themes, with it referencing us, the human species, as the destroyers of everything around us. Continuing to evolve in an incredibly dissonant and atonal direction, less heavy maybe, but still crushing in a more weight of the world on your chest and I can't breathe kind of way. Tracks like Omens in particular have a seriously eerie quality. I also dig Cold Becoming. This is where I'd argue they become a harder sell to the average listener, and I've heard people in the Discord say they have a hard time breaking through the sheer density of their sound. To them, I say I was once there too, but once it clicked, everything becomes so rewarding, just peeling back new layers with each fresh listen. I wouldn't say this one is at the top for me, but they have no, again, bad albums. I'm going to put this one at great tier. Y'all, of course, we have plenty more albums to go, but if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to hit the like button, comment your own rankings below. Again, this is just my opinion. Let's get a conversation going. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Also, consider becoming a channel member or just subscribing if you're new here, because I do videos like this at least twice a week. But next up, we are going to Vermis in 2013. The band's very first album through Relapse Records, and in my written review at the time, I compared it to the sound of an entire planet imploding in on itself. It's this very hypnotic experience that I feel as if I'm being deconstructed cell by cell in an atmosphere that is arguably one of the bleakest I've ever heard. Guitars squeal, crunch, blast, and drill their way through a shrill landscape of utter despair. In many ways, I'd consider this to be sort of a more death metal take on the same energy as like Bluthaus Nord or Deathspell Omega. And then, of course, there's the drumming. The time signatures not only shift, they just devour everything in their path. Personal favorites: Vermis, Clutching Revulsion, Confronting Entropy, The Imperious Week, and Await Recession. Still one of my favorites. There are some elements they improved on from here, but I feel like this is their style in its purest and most original form. It is also going to perfection. They followed that up with Shrines of Paralysis in 2016. Now, after Vermis, it seems logical that they were ready to try some new things, with Marat saying that at the time they wanted to toy with more melody woven into the dissonance, and I think the results here are excellent. Lead single Abrogation is a frickin' colossus and remains my favorite on the record. The perfect fusion of their bleak and disturbing controlled anarchy with some mildly conventional song structures. There are actually a few notable hooks and grooves to speak of on this track, and those sudden breaks and eruptions toward the end are worthy of Vesuvius. But also still plenty of bitter and desolate terrain to explore, with the latter half in particular a barren womb of doomy post-metal meandering. I love it all, but I'm especially fond of Yield to Not, There Are No Saviors, and Chasm of Fire. Bow to Spite, I believe, is their shortest track to date too, and also has some simplified brutality that reminds me of Primitive Man. I'm going to put this one at fantastic. Then we got Stare Into Death and Be Still in 2020. Another challenging record, and I'd argue that this one doubles back down on the mission statement. Thematically, Stare Into Death and Be Still explores the concept of death reverence, confronting the truism that people are often passive observers trapped in the silent horror of observing death calmly and clearly. And this cosmic black hole of a record only falls further into the bottomless misery porn pit. The overall approach here also feels a little bit more doom-laden and melancholic. True to its title, The Lifeless Advance sets an appropriately suffocating and dreary tone devoid of any sense of hope. Then there are some driftier moments bordering on ambience, as on There Is No Horizon and Visceral Ends, but as someone who prefers a little bit more balance between atmosphere and engaging performances, I especially appreciate the title track for its shifting dynamics, memorable little guitar hooks, and hypnotic groove. I'm also partial to the often aggressive Exhale the Ash and shifting tectonic plates of Inversion. In terms of sheer weight and atmosphere, it's probably the biggest one sounding yet, but I'm also putting this one at fantastic. Which brings us to Cutting the Throat of God in 2024. It feels very much like this album largely picks up where the last one left off, leaning hard into the dark melancholy that coined the term post-death metal over a decade ago at this point. To flow through Ashen Hearts joins sorrowful post-metal melodies with barrages of blast beats to very haunting effect, continuing into the sway of The Dawn is Hollow between quietly swirling black smoke and the hellfire it derives from. Further opening the wounds is a standout for me, engaging in a lot of the usual tricks, but then settling into a highly infectious head bob inducing groove in the final third. To See Death Just Once has some tremolo picking sections worthy of black metal, and then the title track makes for a fantastic closer. Another rewarding album, especially after multiple listens, but I will say at this point I'm starting to crave some new twists and surprises. It's still fantastically performed and a cut above the usual generic death metal clones out there, but what was once so fresh and unique is starting to feel a little bit overly familiar, at least to a longtime fan like myself. For newer listeners, this is probably going to be less apparent, but within the scope of their full discography, I'm noticing it more. Even so, I think, again, all of ULCERATE's albums end up being among the most impressive of the year that it comes out, and this one is no different in that respect. Catch them live if you can, too. I saw them once, and man, it was pretty earth-shattering, but this is going to great tier. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings or this video for whatever YouTube wants to recommend directly to you. You can also support me on Patreon too if you want to take that extra leap, get some early access to videos, but that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.